By the end of 1813, after his success during the Battle of the Pyrenees and the Spanish army's defeat of Marshal Soult at the Battle of Saint-Martial, the Duke of Wellington prepared to invade France. However, he delayed these plans as he doubted whether the coalition states of Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden and others, who were united against Napoleon in Northern Europe, were able to achieve a victory against the French, which could lead to the collapse of the coalition, enabling Napoleon to turn his forces on him, especially if he invaded France. Also, the French still held the Spanish city of Pamplona, close to Wellington's line of communications into Spain. However, in mid-September 1813, Wellington received news of a series of coalition victories against Napoleon in Northern Europe, which had driven Napoleon's forces back into France. Wellington also received intelligence that indicated that a royalist uprising in France was ready to join his forces once they had crossed the border. He therefore decided to invade France without delay from the direction of the Bidassoa River. Meanwhile, Soult's army, under orders from Napoleon, were deployed as close as possible to the Spanish border, with Reillier's corps consisting of around 10,550 men on their right wing, closest to the coast on the river Bidassoa. Kessel's corps were deployed in the centre, consisting of around 15,300 men, whose right wing was on the heights of La Bayonnette, with their left wing on the river Nivelle, while d'Erlon's corps, consisting of around 19,200 men, were on the French left wing, around the town of Ainhoa, on the river Nivelle. After experiencing a series of defeats with a poor supply situation, the morale amongst the French troops was very low. Soult was forced to redeploy his cavalry and most of his artillery behind the river Ardor, some 15 miles behind his front line, due to the shortage of forage for his horses. Meanwhile, the French troops spent their time strengthening their defensive positions in preparation for the inevitable Allied attack. On the 9th of September, the Allies finally captured San Sebastian. This enabled Wellington to order the Allied pontoon train to advance in preparation for the crossing of the estuary of the river Bidassoa. Soult was alerted to the Allied advance on the 1st of October, when he discovered that the Allied pontoon train was advancing towards his position. Wellington planned to attack the French on the 7th of October. With his Anglo-Portuguese force of 64,000 men and the Spanish army of the Galicia of over 25,000 men. On the evening of the 6th of October, heavy rainstorms broke, concealing the deployment of the Allied troops, as Wellington concentrated his forces for the attack. The Allied troops were deployed facing the French positions, with their left wing consisting of the 5th Division, commanded by General Hay, on the coast near the town of Fuenterrabía, and the 1st Division, commanded by General Howard, further to the south near the village of Bihobi, with Freire's Spanish divisions still further south near the village of Biriatu. The Allied centre consisted of the divisions of Alton, Longa and Giron, while on the Allied right wing was Dalhousie's division. At around 7 o'clock in the morning on the 7th of October, the Allied 5th Division, under the command of General Hay, crossed the lower estuary of the Bidassoa River. from the town of Fenteria, which was only guarded by a single French infantry battalion of the 3rd Division. And although the Allies had some difficulty crossing the deep river, they managed to take the French by complete surprise. As Hay's men successfully reached the opposite bank of the river, an Allied rocket fired, signalling the general attack of the Allied forces, with the Allied batteries on Montmartre beginning to fire on the French lines. Only then did the French realise that they were under attack and opened fire across the river. As Hay's men seized the village of Hendaye, one battalion continued their advance, driving the French back, while the other battalion swung right to assist the crossing of the 1st Division, supported by the Allied artillery fire from Montmartre. The Allied 1st Division, commanded by General Howard, crossed the Bidassoa by the fords near the village of Biahobi. Relier ordered the 9th Division to advance from the village of Urunye in an attempt to support the 3rd Division in halting the Allied river crossings. However, by the time these reinforcements arrived, the 3rd Division was being forced back by a combination of Hay's and Howard's divisions. The French began to fall back and managed to deploy a defensive line on either side of the main road to the east of Urunye. Meanwhile, Ferrier's Spanish divisions had also crossed the river near the village of Biriatu and managed to force Relier's remaining divisions back to their extended defensive line, which managed to momentarily stem the Allied advance. Meanwhile, in the centre, the Allied divisions advanced at around the same time as the Allied left wing to attack Cassell's forces, with Alton's and Longue's divisions jointly attacking the high ground at Les Bayonnettes, which, after determined French resistance, the Allies managed to seize and drive off its defenders. Meanwhile, at around 4 p.m, Guérin's division attacked Le Grand Rune. However, the French managed to repel the attack with reinforcements from the troops withdrawing from La Bayonnette. Meanwhile, on the extreme right of the Allied wing, the presence of Dalhousie's divisions prevented D'Erlon's corps from assisting either Relier or Cassel. The following morning, heavy fog covered the battlefield. Once the fog cleared, Guérin's and Dalhousie's divisions began to advance towards the left end of the French centre. The French line then started to withdraw to avoid encirclement. The fighting then began to die out, as Wellington refused at this time to advance further into France. For the French, their first defeat on home soil at the Battle of the Bidassoa further dented their already poor morale, which, after a series of defeats by the Allies, they started to believe that they could not defeat Wellington's army. After the battle, both sides' troops took to looting the French countryside, with both Soult and Wellington introducing harsh measures on those caught plundering. During the Battle of the Bidassoa, the Allies suffered total casualties of around 1,200 men. There were around 580 British casualties, with around 250 Portuguese casualties, and Spanish casualties of around 300, while the French suffered over 1,600 casualties. Soon after the battle, Wellington began to plan for a further advance of his forces into mainland France.